So how was the weekend? You have a good weekend?
Yeah, it was all right. We're just going through a weird thing with the time, like we were talking about last night. Kind of the time thing just seems strange to me. I mean, Einstein did that. Time is an illusion and stuff, and it's just starting to sink in. Because it's just like, like we're talking right now. And so when we went on our trip, when we went to Florida recently, I told my kids we were leaving at the airport, and I said, look around, because like you'll blink your eye and we'll be coming back. And it's like that. We said, no, they freaked out when we were coming home. Like, you're right. It's like it just was, it all happened so fast.
It did.
It did. Like that's life too. Life is just like that.
Yeah. Like I woke up and how did I get this old?
Yeah.
Like we were talking last night. Nobody says, "Boy, you're really young." They go, "God, I can't believe you're that old." Nobody says to me, "Oh, you really look young." Those days are over with. But you're absolutely right. Somebody, I don't know whether Einstein said that or not, that as you get older, time goes faster, kind of thing.
Well, that's actually an interest. There's one, as I can find, there's only one psychological theory on that, and it does sort of make sense. And it's about like relative time perspective. So if you're 3, a year of your life is 1/3 of your life. So it seems to go, it seems like a huge part of it. But every year, you get older and older, so a year becomes a smaller and smaller fraction of the totality of your existence. So by the time you're like 60, it's like a year's only 1/60th. So it just seems like really small.
Yeah.
That probably makes up for a little bit of what's happening. But there's got to be a lot. There's something weird going on with time. And that's sort of been my trip lately, just the time variable. Like there's something strange about time. It just isn't it isn't what we think it is. And of course, there's a grand theory of everything. These physicists come up with these grand theories of everything, and one of the more popular ones doesn't even have time in the equation.
Really?
It's like it's a theory of everything. It should have everything, but it doesn't. It's like time is like, no, we can do the whole theory. We don't even need time.
We don't need time.
No.
So something that's been so important for the whole world for so long is suddenly extracted from the equation, and you don't have to think about it. Is that how that works?
Well, and it's interesting. They could put a whole theory of everything together without time. And our favorite saying in our culture, time is money.
Yeah.
So you start doing the math, and you're like, well, time doesn't exist. So what does that mean about money?
Yeah, right. Try to make that work, right? Money doesn't exist. Yeah, the logic of that. Yeah, exactly. Hi, welcome to Guy Shrink. I'm Bill Roman, the host here. I'm here with my compatriot and partner in crime, my producer and good friend, Jordan Valdivias. And at Guy Shrink, we talk about stuff that keeps guys awake at night. Worrisome, what's going on, what's cranking through my head, stuff that makes me go, why in the hell did I do that? And today, as our guest, we have a good friend of mine. I've known this guy for many years, and a professor over at Slippery Rock State in Pennsylvania, Dr. Chris Niebaauer, who's also a prolific author of a couple of books, which we'll talk about a little later. Chris, it's great to have you here, and thanks for being on Zoom.
No, it's great to be here.
Yeah. One of the questions, as we talked earlier, that I like to start with my guests is, what keeps you awake at night? What do you got for us to talk about?
It's such a great question, because when you start getting into like what keeps you awake at night, you can kind of fall into this trap of thinking it's something different all the time. Because, sometimes it's a work problem. Sometimes it's getting old. Sometimes it's your health. Sometimes a lot of times, this is where psychics make all their money, because they know the two main problems are money and relationships, so they'll just they can play on that. So, and there's a lot of truth to that. So but the interesting thing about that question is, it all seems so different, but it isn't. The content seems different, but when you really get down to it, it's okay. So you're everything is fine. You're in a comfortable bed, there's no real problems happening, and you should just fall right asleep. And then that story, it just starts playing the movie in your head about what if this, what if that. And so the real common underlying, like the thing that underlies all of this is your story. So it's the story that keeps me up at night. It's the story that keeps us up. the story that we're telling about our lives. And the fascinating thing about the story, because I've been examining, 'cause to me, one of the most fascinating questions you can get at is, who am I? And so you start digging into that, and you start digging into the who am I story. And then you realize, wow, that's actually it. It's a story. It's a story. And like so many stories, a lot of it's fiction.
Oh, that's a good one.
And so if you ask me, what keeps me up at night, it's a fiction. It's a fictitious story that keeps repeating. And I'm searching around. So you're laying in bed and you're searching around for the remote, trying to why can't I just turn this thing off? And we can't find the remote, and we've been looking for it.
Two thoughts come into my head, Chris, while you're talking about that. Number one is I ain't much, but I'm all I ever think about, as a friend of mine says. And I noticed that the stuff that keeps you awake at night, you're not fumbling around about world peace or how to feed people. It's all about me.
No, that's so classic. When you talk about my story, it's my story. And so all my problems are my problems. And so when we lay awake thinking about my problems, the part of that eludes us is that it's all about I. It's about me. It's about my problems. I mean, really, when you think about this, so have your listeners contemplate this for a little bit. When was the last time you were up all night thinking about someone else's problems? Now, sometimes you do if they're connected to you, like if they're part of your extended self. So if it's someone you love or someone that's in your family, so the concept of the story extends out to other people, and you may stay up worrying about them. But when was the last time you worried about a stranger all night?
Give me some time here to think about that. That's an excellent point. I absolutely agree with that. And the other thing that I was thinking about as you were talking is that you talked about fiction per se. That who's writing the narrative then? And for so many of us, I don't think we really understand. We're really writing the narrative, our story. We're kind of thinking other people are writing it, and we're the recipients of what they're writing. But I think we're really in charge of writing, don't you think?
It's a great way to put it. And I think that when it comes down to it, there are two scripts we're talking about. On the one hand, there's the ego. Now, the ego is this very superficial level of who we think we are. And for a lot of us, we get caught up in that. That's the story I don't think we're writing. I think that story is pre-written. It's culturally imposed on us. And that's the one that we kind of get stuck with. It's like someone just hands us a script and you're stuck with it. And that's the one we get confused with as thinking it's who we are. So a lot of us, when we start off this question and we say, well, who am I? Let's take a look. They think that pre-written script, that they think that's who they are. But it's just culture. It's the culture around them. It's the people around them. And we know human beings, I mean, we're really big on conformity. And we're so big on it, we don't even, like sometimes in my class, I'll ask them, I'm like, well, did you invent the clothes that you're wearing? Did you make the clothes? We're all wearing the same clothes. We're talking the same language. Words have the same meaning. We didn't invent any of this. And so when we talk about the ego script, when I sit and I think I'm Chris and I think I'm 54 years old, that's the story that was imposed on me. That's the story that someone told me I am. But I think there is a different level when you start really getting into this, who am I? And you can recognize that you actually are the artist. You are the director. It's just, you've got to get past that ego story to start getting at exactly what it is that is doing the writing. Where, it's funny because another way you can actually put that question is you could say, where does creativity come from? And when you say, like, does my ego really come up with anything good? You start recognizing it's not, it's like a computer program. That's the way I always talk about the ego. And computer programs aren't very creative. They just sort of, it's a bunch of if-then statements, and they're rule-based. they're like a bureaucrat. There's a big set of rules, and so when we start getting at where creativity comes from, we realize that that's connecting with the artist. That's connecting with the true writer of her story, the one who's really in charge. But that is much more of a mystery. That's a more difficult one to put into words, and it's a more difficult one to articulate, to talk with in language. And so we get into the neuropsych. So I study neuropsychology, and I study the left and right sides of the brain. And one of the fascinating things that this can help us with this who am I story is that the left side of the brain is particularly talented with confabulation. It's particularly talented with language. And so it's always, it's telling these stories. So when you're laying, trying to sleep, but you're laying awake, it's the one who's telling that story. It's the one who's saying, well, what if this happens tomorrow? What if this happens? And so the neuropsychology of it has been pretty insightful, because it's pointing to certain areas of the brain that create these stories. And the biggest mistake we make is to confuse who we are with that story.
So what we're worried about is basically somebody else's culture's version of who we are. That's what we suffer with and wrestle with, as opposed to the artistic sense of who we are. Is that what you're going to say?
That's perfectly put. And when you get beyond the cultural self, and you start playing around with the true, this is all bringing me back to a friend of mine, Jacob Norby. He just wrote this book, The Creative Cure. And what my favorite line from the entire book, he said that conformity is the opposite of creativity. And I think he was really onto something with that, because when we get through this first stage that we're trying to figure out who we are, and we think we've discovered it. So maybe I say, whoa, I'm an introvert, or I'm a professor, or I'm 54, or I'm a male, or, these are all the things that have been imposed on us. And there's not a whole lot of creativity with any of that, And so when we get beyond that cultural self, that's when we realize that all throughout human history, so if we look at all the insights and epiphanies that human beings have had, not a single person who has had a brilliant epiphany has any clue where it came from. It's just, these things, just they're like, grace, or they're like some mystical experience, because that the story that so many of us typically relate to just has no clue where this true creativity is coming from.
So that would be something out of the blue, then, is what you're saying.
It's not, or we just say something came over me, or it's some kind of like we've come up with all kinds of stories to try to explain it, but in the end, it really is, it's a mystery. But when you accept that mystery, maybe that really is who I am, and I can't put it into words, and I can't articulate it very well. But that is really, I think, for a lot of people, that's that moment. There's like two paths, and they realize, like, I can kind of keep going down this one conformity path, and there's a lot of reward for that. In our culture, it's like, if you play ball and you play by the rules, and you play the game of self nicely, there's all kinds of rewards for that. When you venture off to this other path, and you and think about how the mystics historically have been treated, I mean, when they kind of venture off of the path of conformity, and they're really exploring who they really are, that's all stuff that's unknown. And maybe we've just talked about this before, but I think it's a really important part of the Arthurian legends. And so when you look at the Knights of the Round Table, they're all on this path of exploration. They're on this quest to find out who
the Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail.
Looking for the Holy Grail, yeah.
The Grail Quest is we're all on the Grail Quest, but there's a part that always stuck out. This was probably back in my 20s. This is one of those things, those moments that hit me. And so when the knights set out for their journey, they had to enter the dark forest, the unknown. That's our we're going into the unknown. And they all had to enter at a place without a path. So they all had to enter in a place that no one has entered before. So again, it's, if you go in where there's a predictable path, then you're conforming.
Right.
So that act of self-discovery, it really has to break, and it's an uncomfortable feeling. You have to break who society has taught you are, and you have to go on a discovery of who you actually are. And it's not going to be comfortable, and it's not going to be an easy path.
Well, you don't have to wait till you're 20. Maybe that happens at 55 when you go into work and the boss comes and says, "Here's a cardboard box. We want you to fill it with your stuff and get out of here in 10 minutes." Your severance package is a week of pay. Goodbye. And there's no guidance for that little adventure. And so maybe a midlife crisis is another one of those steps into the forest of unknown. What do you think?
Yeah, a crisis. What we look at as a crisis is really something that we just don't have an answer to. I mean, we say it's a crisis because we don't know what's happening in the future. And that kind of predictability brings us a lot of safety. And one of the things that is difficult to really take in is that feeling of safety is actually the same thing as feeling anxious. We don't really get that. I mean, the two are like two sides of the same coin. Because you're running from anxiety and you're feeling good in safety. And so when a crisis hits you, when you go to work, and the universe throws you something you could have never predicted, and sometimes it's cancer, sometimes it's some other disease, sometimes it's a divorce, sometimes it's death, sometimes it's you walk in, like you said, it's a nice way to put it, all your stuff, all of your career, your 20-year career is in a box. and so
right.
You can carry your career out to the elevator. And the thing that gets us, another thing I think is fascinating about these situations, because of course they bring us so much stress, but the reason they bring us so much stress is not because of the unknown. It's very difficult to be stressed out about something you truly don't know. But what happens is, so I was talking about that, how we create stories, and we want to try to predict the future, and we want to stabilize our existence, and it's not the unknown that we really fear. It's all the things that we think we know. Like, you've got your career in a box, and you're walking out the elevator, and the story is saying, "I'm a failure. I have failed. I'll never recover from this." And so we're not really afraid of the unknown. What we're really afraid of is those stories. It's the same thing that keeps us awake at night. That storytelling. I was kind of playing around with this with a conversation a couple weeks ago where we were talking about our species, Homo sapiens, one who knows, and we were joking, and I said,
"Yeah, that's a joke." It's a joke.
We're really, one who confabulates, and I forget who said it, but they said, "Yeah, we're like, Homo confabulist." I don't know if that's the correct Latin, but we start with our confabulations, our stories, and that's what really gets us into trouble. And so, it's not the unknown we fear, it's the stories that we create, that we think we're creating. Because again, you said, like, there's two different, like we talked about.
Yes,
we are the writer of our story.
Yes.
The true writer of the story isn't afraid. It's not creating these stories, but that cultural, that social program that is in our brain that we started picking up very early in life, that's the storyteller that told us, this is, follow the path, go the path that everyone else, that's the safe path, and that's going to lead to wealth, it's going to lead to success, it's going to lead to happiness. And so when a crisis hits, these stories start spinning, and they start, and we buy into them. It's very, and I have a lot of empathy. If I was walking down the hallway with my career in a box, um, I would hear those stories too.
Yeah.
And if you believe them, then you're really in trouble. And if you believe them, if you take them seriously, then and that's the thing you find with some spiritual teachers. They've gone down the path so long, they've become conscious of the storyteller. And so they may be walking down the hallway and they hear the story, and they hear the story saying you're going to be broke and you're financially ruined, but they just sort of laugh at it because they don't take that story very seriously, and they know it's not really their story. It's just the cultural story that people has been imposed on us, and we just assume it's who we are, but it isn't.
So what do we say to a guy who's 55 and has his career in a box, is walking down, to the car? So what do we say? Hey, not to worry. It's all going to be okay. Go home, have a beer, and then be busy writing a new story, or what? I see a number of clients in my practice that this is exactly what's happened to them. And now they're lost in familiar places. They don't have a clue as to what to do, and how to get out of that.
And this idea of just saying, look, it's going to be all right. We all know that that's not going to carry us very far, and they may even get more mad at you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so what I like to do, sometimes you just have to give it time. So, it's just like, you don't go up to someone at the end of Titanic and they're in tears, and you don't just go up and say, look, it's just a movie.
Right.
Sometimes the best thing is to just sort of like, hold off for a little bit, and then, open a door for them. And, this is a great opportunity to explore, to go into that dark forest and make your own path, and find out who you really are. You've been living this whole life where you've thought you were, it's like an actor who gets so caught up in their role, they think that they're really that person. And for a lot of us, we've kind of been coasting into our 50s, just reading a script that someone else wrote and thinking it's us. And this is actually a great opportunity. It's a chance to throw that script away and say,
Yeah.
well, who am I without my story?
Now, I don't know this for sure because I don't read Chinese, but I'm told that the characters that represent crisis in the Chinese language are characters that mean danger and opportunity. Something that's they don't seem to fit very well, which is good. They're not supposed to fit, and so you're at a cognitive dissonant kind of place. And in the danger, there's also the opportunity, the open door, perhaps, of consider something else that you never considered before, which is what I think keeps a guy awake at night. Is I can't consider anything else. And if I had some doors opening, I might be able to at least entertain a different idea about what to do in this situation.
We did a study, this is a long time ago. We were looking at what luck is. And it's interesting because, a lot of us, we just say, well, that person got lucky. And when you get into the research on luck, it turns out actually what luck is, what we think of luck is really an attentional process. And sometimes when we get obsessed with our story, it's like our scope of it, it's like our spotlight of attention becomes so narrow. It's only on that story. And what happens is all these doors may be open, but we miss them. We don't even see them because our attention span, it's become so narrow. And so what luck is turning the spotlight up so it becomes so vast that you're actually aware of these doors being open. You're aware of opportunity. And other people will look at you and say, oh, well, you were just lucky. It's like, no, you actually noticed that this door was open.
Yes, I believe Louis Pasteur said that chance favors those who are prepared. So that's luck.
Yeah, and I think people played with that a little bit too, and like it's chance favors someone who has the attention to even notice that the door is open, and so again, that storytelling mechanism can get so the victimhood stuff. that can be so consuming. And there's a strange sense that it feels good. People enjoy the victimhood thing. I mean, not like if you said, oh, you're just enjoying your story, I mean, they'd probably get quite angry with you. But there is a level at which that we do enjoy it because it's a good story. I mean, we watch stories, we watch movies and we call that entertainment. It's just now you're the star, you're starring in this tragedy. And sometimes it's difficult to see that that there's when I use the phrase "a part of you" a lot, and because I don't really think that who we are, at least on some levels, particularly neuropsychologically, it's not one solid entity. There's really like a symphony. With sound, sometimes it gets coordinated, but there's a lot of different cells in the skull, and when you start to, and so in my book, I actually have a practice for people, and it's how many cells in a day. And what you do is you start becoming aware of all the different cells. And so you have this work self, and then you have this, and then you're coming home and you got the music cranked and you start feeling really good. Then it's a traffic jam, and then you're angry. And so these cells are just continuously flowing throughout the day. And a lot of us have this idea that and this is what I talk about when I talk about the ego. We think that there's this self behind the selves, that there's some thinker of the thoughts. And when you start exploring these different selves that just come and go so whimsically, it can be a great exercise that will help you question that. It will help you question your initial story.
Okay, that makes sense. So what's keeping me awake at night? Maybe one of the questions I could ask is, so what part of me is disturbed by whatever it is I'm fumbling around with in my head? You're talking about, there's two, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, there's two really good therapeutic protocols out there that have been very helpful. One's called ego state therapy, which is and then internal family systems therapy, which is really talks exactly about what you're talking about. The parts of me. Now this is different than multiple personality disorder, but the idea is that little 8-year-old boy in conflict here, or is that 15-year-old guy who's not getting his way? Is that what's going on? So maybe some of the stuff that keeps me awake at night is really some of these other ego states that I have.
Yeah. And is there some part, so when you do this exploration, is there some part, some self that's enjoying the suffering?
Yeah.
That's enjoying this trip, that's enjoying this, you're walking out of your office and all your 20-year careers in a box, and you start telling the sad me story. Well, is there some part of you that's enjoying that sad me story? And what would your life be like if you let that go? I mean, what if you just kind of put a close to that story and said, okay, I did the victimhood thing and I did the why me thing. What would it be like to let go of that story for a while? Just think of it as an experiment. So you're not forced into it, but just give it a shot.
I like that idea of experimenting for 2 weeks. Try this out and see what happens. A friend of mine once talked about forgiveness as being giving up all hope for a better past, and just try that out for a week and see what happens. About letting go of certain things, certain ways of narratives that you make, and see what happens to you.
And it's another exercise I do with my students, and I challenge them. So I really make it kind of a contest.
I'm not taking your class, that's for sure.
I say, how long can you go without making a complaint?
Oh, wow.
And I define a complaint as arguing with reality that does no good. So, if you get food from a restaurant and it's the wrong food and you say, no, you gave me the wrong, that's not a complaint. That's just, fixing something that's obviously wrong. And by making that statement, they'll bring you the right food.
Yeah.
So a complaint is simply, it's raining outside and you walk out and you're like, why did it have to rain today? Well, that doesn't do anything. It doesn't fix anything. And so I've been doing this for about 10 years now with my students. And I had so many wonderful, honest reactions. I had one student tell me, like, she loves complaining so much, she has no interest in giving it up, which I found really interesting. She was aware enough that she loved to complain. And other students they couldn't believe how much, when they started to become conscious of this habit, that this is a habitual thing and our culture excels at it. And if you've ever had this happen, where like we get into who had the worst day debate, and we start talking, and you tell me your bad day, and I tell you, and we're trying to one up each other. We're like trying to win the contest of who had the worst day. I'm like, why do you want to win that contest? What part of you?
I'm the best miserable person you'll ever meet.
And what part of you is clinging to that? And like you put it, like, is this an old part of me? Is it something from like, some 15-year-old story that like, it just loves this misery and it's clinging to it and it won't let it go because it just feels good to suffer.
I think you're right on that. I think there's no pain, no gain. We kind of buy into that for all things. I have to be miserable. I can't have. You and I talked about this before. The demise of fun. It can't play anymore. Everything's serious. You can't have jokes. It's just crazy. It really is. So.
When people ask me, since I do research on the left and right sides of the brain, I'm often asked the question, well, just tell me the basics. Like, what does the left side do and what does the right side do? And I could give a long lecture on this and talk about the left with language and the right with spatial awareness and all this. But one of the things, if you put all the research together and then you kind of step back a little bit and say, okay, what's really going on with the two sides of the brain? The way I would put it now is the left side of the brain is terribly serious about life and the right side of the brain plays. And we came into this world in a mode of play, in a mode of fun, in a mode of having virtually no seriousness. And even if we did have a little bit of we would let it go very quickly. And you see this on the, when kids play and they might have a little bit of anger, but it comes and goes because they're not taking the anger very seriously. And that's actually an interesting thing about the emotions of kids, especially when you look at a newborn. They're not always happy, but they're living in the present moment, and so happiness, pain and pleasure come and go, and they just let it flow. And then the left brain has this intense seriousness to it that virtually takes all the fun out of our, particularly when you get into being 50. So if we could do a curve here, like the fun curve, it's like maxed out, like maybe when we're 5, 6, and 7, and then it just goes, and then by 50 it's almost gone.
Is that midlife crisis thing? The piece of it is life isn't humorous anymore.
Yeah, so when we look at the curve going down, and then we'd say, when it gets low, that's the midlife crisis when it hits, and
wow.
You get so much fun out of things. And Ian McGilchrist, who wrote The Master and His Emissary, which is an amazing book about the left and right sides of the brain. But one of the favorite, and I'm not sure he did this quote, but it's just something that always stuck with me, and it was about our modern culture. And he said, anyone who lives in our culture today, it's a bureaucrat's dream and a poet's nightmare. And think about bureaucracy. And I've done some videos on this, and I've talked about how the left brain is really the ultimate bureaucrat. It wants to, and we say, well, what do you mean bureaucracy? If you trace the word, it really just means a desk. And a desk is a place where we go and we organize. And it's that organization that we've become so obsessed with, and it's an organization that really is about control, and it's about predictability, and it's about you can't, and this world that we're living in that is so obsessed with bureaucracy, is the exact opposite of the world of fun. It's the opposite of the world of play. And even play, sometimes there are rules, but no one takes the rules seriously. And and you can't plan to play. You can't plan, and you can't and you can't be serious about play. And I've watched a couple documentaries where they've taken really famous sitcoms, things like Seinfeld, or these shows that have just captured so many people's attention, and were just thought of as classic comedies. And they would say that they could feel it. If it got too serious on the set, it was not going to work. And so the moment they started to be spontaneous, drop the plans, forget the planned jokes, and that's what improv is all about. That's why.
Yeah. That's why Jackie Gleason, way back 100 years ago, in The Honeymooners, that was mostly all ad lib. Same with I Love Lucy. All these classic old time comedies, they had kind of an idea what they wanted to do, but they just kind of fell off, just played off of each other, which made it so effective in a playful kind of way. Yeah, remind me again of that Alan Watts quote that you said a while back. We were talking about the gods.
So I've been a huge fan of Alan Watts probably my whole life because, I started off in psychology and definitely found a lot of that useful. But then Alan Watts came into my life, and I just found him to be such a great teacher because he like one of his quotes is that, the reason we suffer is because we take serious what God meant for us to have fun with. And and there's so much truth to that, because and the interesting thing about humor, there's a couple interesting things about humor, is that one, no one understands it. No one knows why we laugh. I mean, and you get into psychology, they're like, they have no clue why some things are funny. We just know when it's funny. And there was one of my favorite quotes was on my professor's door back in grad school. He was a developmental psychologist, and he said, rocket science is child's play next to understanding child's play. And the reason I love that quote so much is, so we've got this bureaucratic mindset. This is that storyteller that thinks that if I do this and that, I'll be successful. And it can't understand, it can't figure things out, because every time I do A, B, and C, it's like I maybe get a little bit of happiness, but then it just fades. And then I have some other thing that I think is going to make me happy. So I do that. And it just doesn't work. And so I call it the left brain bureaucrat. And that's what, so many of us are living that life of that left brain bureaucrat. And the problem here is that we're trying to solve a problem by thinking, but you're never going to have a good time, and you're never going to have fun by thinking about it. There's no having fun and enjoying life and playing isn't a thinking problem.
Yeah, I think Einstein said something like that. You can't solve a problem with the same thinking that got you into the problem.
And that's I really do buy into that. I play on that a little bit, and I say you can't solve a thinking problem with more thinking. But so many of us are doing that. We're stuck in a thinking problem, which is very serious. It's that bureaucrat. And we're trying to think our way out of the thinking problem. And so we go read more and more books, and we get deeper and deeper, layer after layer, trying to figure this whole stuff out. But the trick is to throw all that away and just have some fun. But if you just tell someone that, they're not really sure. And I don't know, maybe it is getting old. This has happened to me a couple times recently. And it's when I think I've lost my cell phone. And so, you start the whole storyteller goes crazy, and this is a couple $100, and I have what kind of information do I have on the cell phone, and start spinning all these tragic stories and all this. And then this is happening to me twice, and then I noticed my phone was in my hand.
Oh.
And then I couldn't help it. I literally laughed out loud. I just started laughing because it was just so ridiculous. Like everything I've been looking for was right here. I had it. the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was totally freaked out because I thought I didn't have it. And I think that captures a lot of what's going on in our modern culture, and a lot of, you know, when you're 50, in your 50s, and you hit that midlife crisis, and it looks like, you know, it looks like I've lost my phone, I've lost my job, and it's all tragic, and you don't realize, but you've got it all. It's right there. Everything you need is right. You have it. And when you're hit with that kind of absurdity, just the absurd insight that I've been looking for something for so long that I've had the entire time, you just can't help but to find it kind of funny.
Yeah. Laughter is the best medicine, they say. I often say to people I'm working with, coaching, that instead of thinking your way into a new way of acting, how about acting your way into a new way of thinking? Just do it. Just go have some fun and see what happens.
That was William James, the famous American psychologist. It really had a form that I think eventually became our phrase, "Fake it till you make it."
Yeah.
And he really believed that. In fact, the interesting thing is that one of my other favorite studies is they had people, they were looking at jokes, comic books and stuff, and they had a pencil. And they had two conditions. So one, they would hold the pencil at the very tip of their mouth, and that doesn't activate any of the muscles. But then they had another one where they had to hold the pencil at the back of the mouth, and that activates all the muscles that engage when we smile and laugh. And the people in that condition found all the comics far more funny.
If they had the pencil in their mouth in the back.
If they had it in the back, so they were activating all the, like, so the brain was like, well, we must be smiling, and so they thought it was really funny. So you can use these tricks, and you know, start smiling, start laughing, and then see what happens, see where it goes. And so because we're trying to figure it out, like, okay, how do I get up from this mode of this serious bureaucrat? How do I get over to having some fun again?
Well, I think. Yeah, your exercise of don't complain for a week, see what happens. Is acting my way into a new way of thinking, is what you're doing. You say that.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing about complaining is that it's so habitual now, we don't even realize that it does. You know, that's the same thing. You're faking it till you make it. So if you complain all day, suppose you are really happy, and but you start complaining, then you could work it backwards with that too, and you'll start getting in a bad mood. I mean, if you complain all day, and this is one of the misunderstandings, I think it's where Freud really just went wrong. Freud had this idea that we would hold it all in, and if we had a big complaint session, that was like catharsis, and we would let it all out. But the problem is, the research really shows that, you know, that letting it all out, it just makes it worse. Yeah. It's like, you know, just get it out. You get this styrofoam baseball bat here and beat on this doll for a half hour in therapy, and you'll feel better. And the research that they've done after that says, no, it just makes people worse. They get madder all the time. So never work. Hey, could we take a couple of minutes break for a minute, and then I want to ask a couple other questions to wrap it up. Is that all right? Oh, whatever you want. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Because you know, at this age, I have urgency calls. So sit tight.
Yeah, no, take your time.
Okay, big guy, I'm back. Yeah, well, a buddy of mine, a really good friend of mine, is the CFO of a adult diaper company here in town, and he said, "Bill, no worries, I can get you a lifetime supply if you want." I said, "I ain't quite ready for that yet."
Not yet, but you know, you never know. You never know. Things change, and we can adapt. We can adapt to a lot of different things that we would never, you know.
Well, I think that's a piece of surviving a midlife crisis, is knowing I can adapt. It's not the end of the world. I mean, maybe in the moment, but the adaptation is what makes our species survive. And so it's important. It's important to think about that.
And when you think about our species, and you know, I think it was Graham Hancock who was doing some really interesting things, and he said that our species suffers from terrible amnesia. We forget where we came from. Mm-hmm. And this is why I tell people, you know, open up a book on archaeology, let's start investigating how our ancestors lived. And if you go back maybe 100,000 years ago, I mean, you know, they were dealing with ice ages every 10,000 years. So,
Yeah, right,
and
right.
so if we complain of, oh, the air conditioning's it's a couple degrees off. Well, you've got the biology. Biologically, we're the same species. If you took one of us as an infant and just threw us back into, 100,000 years, we would have been able to go out into the cold. We wouldn't have felt it. And so we have this untapped capacity for change that thinking left brain bureaucrat is clueless to. It tells a story like, no, I can't do it. I need this amount of money. And I mean, all these things that this left brain bureaucrat is obsessed with, none of it even existed 100,000 years ago.
Okay, so with the right brain then play, improvisation, I don't want to say survival per se, but adaptation. These are things that the left brain can do. You wanted to say that?
Oh,
okay.
yeah. In fact, that's exactly. So we talk about desire, and then the left brain is always the one that is thinking about what can I have next. And I do this quote all the time by Rockefeller, who's one of the richest people in the country for a long time. And someone had asked him, like, well, how much money do you need? And he gave the absolutely perfect left brain answer. He said, just a little bit more than I have. And that's the nature of our ancestors that got us out of that really horrific environment. We wanted a little bit more than what we had, whether it was food. And so that's what desire is, wanting what you don't have. But it's all tied in with this left brain program. When you get over to play, you realize you've already got everything you need. You're not on a quest to and play. Even if you're playing to win, you realize, because think about it, there are two different ways you can play the same game. You can do a left brain version of it that gets very serious and I must win, and then it becomes dreadful. But you can also do a right brain version of it where it's all fun and you're absolutely. And when you look at the sports psychology, any athlete that is focused on winning almost always loses. And the only way they really win, and so, like, I think it was Michael Jordan who talked about first being in the zone. And the whole idea of being in the zone is you're not thinking of winning. Mm-hmm. You're so in the moment that you really are playing. And so we say you're playing sports. You're playing. Mm-hmm. The original nature of these things was play. Mm-hmm. And you really are. And when that athlete who is having fun and in the moment is actually, that's the grand irony of all this. They're the one who will win. Yeah. And the other person who wants to win so bad, they're the one who chokes.
Yes.
It missed a 20, some kind of field goal that they could make in their sleep, but they get so caught up in thinking that they miss something simple.
Yes. Urban Meyer, former coach at Ohio State, has a podcast. Him and another friend of his, Tim Kite, talk a lot about this. And Urban's constantly saying, we want to train guys to play in the moment. Let's execute this play. Don't worry about the scoreboard. And how important it is. Just be mindful about what you need to do in this moment right now. And so, of course, you see the results of that kind of coaching. But it is about playfulness. You may not call it that, but that's what you're saying is happening.
And there's so many interesting ironies with all this. I remember my son's soccer coach getting really angry and just saying, like, no mental mistakes. And of course, when you put that kind of pressure, that's the first thing you're going to do is make, like, if I tell everyone right now, so anyone listening, like, do not, under any circumstance, do not think of the number 13 in the next 10 seconds. It's like, no, it's the first thing that pops in our head. And so that's the nature of how the left brain works. It has this, whatever is, it's looking for what isn't. And that's what desire is. And it's a great program. It kept us alive for a long time. But the truth is, we just don't need it. We've outlived this program. And, most of anyone listening to this probably has so many more comforts than they probably really need, that even if you lost your job, you're going to be fine. If when we look at our ancestors, we see that they lived in worlds that, if we could transport them to our modern life, I mean, just living in a house is just having a refrigerator. We have so many comforts that put us so far ahead of not just our ancestors, but a lot of people even on the globe today. And so you say, well, why can't I be happy? I've got friends who've got huge $1 million homes, and they get so confused. They're like, I just don't get it. I've got everything, but I'm still not happy. Well, they're in that program that worked in the past. Mm-hmm. In the past, it's like people were struggling so much that that program worked. So if you got all the food then you really did need to try to focus on getting more food.
Yeah.
But the program has outlived its usefulness. We don't need it any longer. And it doesn't lead to play. It doesn't lead to happy. It doesn't lead to having some fun. And if our suffering really is because we're taking seriously what was meant for fun, well, if we keep taking it seriously, we're going to miss out. And I think that's what happens when you start to get in your 50s. You're just like, I've been playing this bureaucratic game for a really long time. I want to have some fun again. And that's why we go buy sports cars. And that's why, I remember my first sports car I bought a couple years ago. And I just remember going really fast in it. And I was just like I was like a
15 again, like 15 all over again.
It was, all I wanted to do was go fast. And I started laughing. I was having, this time. And I think, and people get like, well, why is that? What's about the midlife crisis? Why do people want to go buy cars? And it's kind of like, trying to have fun again when people are buying toys again.
Okay. So Chris, you got to just kind of wrap things up. You got a couple of one-liner ideas, coaching for guys that lay awake all night or lay awake at night thinking about stuff like midlife crises or what's going on in my head.
It's getting to be kind of, and you may have even seen this meme. It's wonderful that it's getting to be so popular now. But I think the simplest advice to help shift from this kind of overthinking bureaucrat to having some fun again is don't believe everything you think.
Okay, that's good. Don't believe everything you think. Okay.
Everything you think. Don't believe everything you feel. Don't, in the end, totally buy into the story. And so as you're walking, carrying your career out, what you think is your career in this box, you'll hear the storyteller, and it'll be telling all these stories. You don't have to believe in it. You, the real artist, the real creator of your destiny, doesn't have to believe in that story.
Well, Chris, thanks. Thanks for a great conversation today. It's always good talking with you when we get together, either in person or on the phone or whatever it is. You're such a wise person and a genuinely fun guy. So thanks a lot for being on Guy Shrink with me.
Thanks. It was a wonderful time, and
we'll see what happens, man.